Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last session of our first Wine Media Virtual Summit. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Sarah Woolner, and I work for Zephyr Conferences, who puts on the Wine Media Conference. Hopefully, you've been seeing a lot of me and have been attending other sessions, but three quick facts. I graduated college last year from the University of Colorado Boulder. Go Buffs. I'm currently in the Bay Area of California, and anybody who's affected by the wildfires and the smoke, we are thinking of you. Please stay safe. I know a lot of you out here are joining us from the California area, so please stay safe. Finally, in honor of us supposed to be having the conference in Eugene, Oregon, I will be drinking a Troon Vineyard wine after this session, and they are a vineyard in the Willamette Valley. So awesome.
Yes.
And they'll also be at our tasting later today too. So if you're going to be joining there. But yeah, we are coming to you virtually live. We had to postpone the conference to August of 2021. So we're hoping we can all meet and cheers in person then. But in the meantime, we're happy to be with you here now. So thank you all for joining. I don't want to take up too much time. I know you found the chat section. Great. Keep chatting during the session. I will send the chat log to all of our panelists. If you did have a question for them, please put them in the Ask a Question section in the bottom middle-ish of your screen. That way I can keep track of them and I can send them to Alder and he will propose them to the panel. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce for the final time our last session. I'd love to introduce Alder Yarrow. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Alder. Many of you know me. It's been a while since I've been to one of these conferences. I was at the very first. I've run vinography for many years and write for Jancis Robinson. And I'm really happy to be here in this community right now and also with this wonderful group of panelists that I've got for this session, which might as well be entitled Wine Writers Surviving Their Own Personal Apocalypses, or something along the lines of that. I don't want this last session to be a bummer because, it's the last session of this conference, but the topic here today is how are we all doing amidst all of this craziness? I apologize to those of you in advance who are only here to see my COVID fro, but I did in fact cut it off a couple of weeks ago. So you can stop with the comments there, Joe. It just got too much for me. But anyway, let me introduce my panelists. I'm going to just go sort of clockwise from what I've got on my screen. So with the ceiling fan behind her, we have RH Drexel, who has been in the wine business for about 30 years. She has a day job doing wine PR and marketing and a night job writing about wine in many forms, but perhaps the most compelling and best known is her work as the author of Loam Baby, a periodic zine that comes out that's filled with absolutely wonderful writing and interviews and all sorts of good stuff. She also writes for The Wine Advocate and for Jab Dunnick. Next, looking like an e-commerce support representative or airline pilot, you choose Max Allen from Australia. Many of you are quite familiar with Alan. He's been a regular face at these conferences. He's based in Melbourne. He's been writing for wine also for about 30 years. For newspapers, magazines, and is just published his fourth book, which we'll hear a little bit about, no doubt, during this conversation today. And last, clockwise here for me, is Thaddeus Buggs, also a familiar face for many of you. He presented most recently, I think, in the Walla Walla conference. Thaddeus, if we were zoomed out, we could see he's wearing his Minority Wine Report t-shirt. So he runs that blog, as well as recently having started a podcast, which is super cool, called Wine in Black and White. And of course, the little known fact that most people know about him was that he was an FBI agent for 22 years, which in addition to being kind of cool, gives him some interesting perspective on all the shit that's been happening in the world with regards to social justice and Black Lives Matter and things like that. So we'll certainly get into that conversation today. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining us in the chat. And let's dive into what is, a pretty weighty set of topics for this conversation. So maybe let's start where I ended there with Thaddeus. And would you mind just talking a little bit about what your life has been like in the past 6 months, and how all the things that have been happening in the world, from the pandemic to all the social justice and protests and stuff that we're seeing, have affected you personally, Thaddeus, and what you've been doing to survive all this?
Well, the one thing I've been doing to survive it is that I call it drinking good juice, and I try to do that as often as possible. A nice glass of wine and maybe even a cigar and some scotch after that late night. But the main thing that's probably has affected me the last 6 months or so, even though the pandemic started and I just got back from France doing a 10-day wine trip through Burgundy in the south part of France. And then I got back around March 10th or 12th. And then basically the country was starting to shut down. And then as we further go on, then the George Floyd situation, a good buddy of mine sent me the video of that. I think it was about a minute after it happened. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at this video and I'm thinking that this can't be real. Like it was somebody had staged it or something, because I'm thinking that no rightful peace officer in his right mind can have a guy on the ground and his knee on the back of his neck, all this weight. If you have any decency in your soul, you can't do anything like that. So I thought it was so surreal to see something like that. And then once I came to grips with it, I knew that we had a bigger problem than we thought we had in America. And then even though I was a law enforcement officer, FBI for 22 years, and I like to think that I earned the people respect. But when something like that happened, because the majority of officers are good people, but just one or two just ruin it for everybody. And it just really brought everything to the forefront as far as how we need to do something to kind of reform and train better and just come together, because something like that can't happen again in the country, or really bad things will happen.
Yeah. Has it got you down? I mean, has it kept you awake at night, or what has been the real personal emotional impact of that?
No, it has, from the extent that, I mean, as much as you try to succeed in this country, and I'm just speaking primarily for Black people, there's still a certain part of the community or the country that tries to bring you back down to a level where they want you at, even though you do everything right, but you still come up wrong. And that's one of the harmful things about America, in a sense, with I'm just speaking for Black people, because that's mainly what I know, is that this country posed to be the land of opportunity for everybody, but at some point it just becomes just the land of opportunity for a few. But I believe in decency. I believe that most people in this country want to come together. And I was really happy to see, even though the protesting was majority Black, but there was a lot of other white people, brown people, and other people joining the protest. So I think America wants to see a change, and I think it'll come soon. But getting back to your initial question, and there were several times when I just laid in bed and just couldn't understand exactly what was going on or why it was going on. But then I come to the realization that when you try to make progress and then things like this happen to George Floyd, and then we take the guy that got shot in the back in Atlanta. I mean, that was totally not necessary. They had talked to the guy for about 40 minutes before the situation got escalated. They could have called the guy's mother, a sister up or something, and said, come and pick him up. They had his car, they had his keys. They could have easily de-escalated that situation. Instead, it started another fire. So,
Yeah. Well, so maybe keeping on the theme of sort of like just dealing with all this mentally, RH, would you mind talking a little about how you are coping with all this stuff? I mean, I think you've been quite open in the past about, you know, some of the challenges that you face in your life from a mental health perspective. Can you share a little bit about how you're doing personally and any, you know, ways that you're coping as a writer and as a human being with all this?
Sure. Yeah, so my PTSD and my clinical depression were sort of in remission for quite a long time, leading up to the pandemic and the mandates going into place, and then both of them started to spiral a bit, and then I think it got even quite a bit worse with the murder of Mr. Floyd, and so I could tell the signs were coming with anyone who's lived with PTSD or lives with it. It's fairly debilitating, and even your own home starts to feel unsafe. And of course, with depression, it can become quite physical and difficult to do things. So I got myself into therapy again right away. It's nice to have a neutral person to be able to speak to.
Mm-hmm.
And I also took a hard look at my cannabis and alcohol use. I think I was starting to maybe smoke a little too much pot there at the beginning. So I dialed back on that a little bit, just because it can lead a little bit for me personally to anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And just try to gain some perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think a lot of mental health problems stem essentially from fear and unresolved trauma, and so just trying to get a perspective on those things, and so I'm working on it just day by day.
Yeah.
Trying to stay in touch with nature as much as possible. It's been hard with the air quality being poor the last couple of days, but trying to remain grounded, get outdoors, connect with people however I can.
And
So yeah.
how has your craft been through all of this? Is writing something that you're finding solace in, or is it something that just requires more effort and time and sort of attention than you're able to give it, given everything that's going on? How is that going?
It depends on the day. You know, some days, you know, the creativity comes, and then it's a wonderful release, and it's a lifesaver when you can just write, at least for me. And then there are other days where, you know, I can't string a sentence together, and those are the tough days, really, without that creative outlet.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I find myself doom scrolling a lot, you know, like refreshing the damn fire perimeter lines in Northern California and trying to figure out which vineyards are burned down and stuff like that. It's and then I look up and 3 hours have gone by and I'm like, yeah, I can't bring myself to write something. I'm too worried about whether more of my friends are losing their houses and stuff like that. So I get it. Max, maybe let's turn to you. You're on the other side of the world, but perhaps no less traumatized. It sounds like Melbourne's gone back into a stage 4 lockdown and curfew and all that stuff. How's it going in your world? What's this been like for you personally the last 6 months?
I think a winemaker that I interviewed way back in April, so we were only a couple of months into the pandemic at that stage, but of course we'd all been through, on the east coast of Australia, we'd all been through the bushfires, if not physically, then certainly the smoke, which everybody in the Bay Area is experiencing right now. So we had, and she summed it up in April, and she said she just felt like she'd been on high alert constantly since December. And in Melbourne, we felt like that now. What is it? I don't even know what month it is, August. And so seeing you guys go into a fire season that's so dramatic and so threatening right now kind of does, you just feel like I feel like we're back. You must feel like we were feeling, 6 months ago, and it kind of hasn't let up. So there's also a lovely line from, was it the Radiohead song from a couple of years ago? This low-level panic, that low-flying panic attack, this constant white noise of anxiety that I think is a bizarre experience when you're experiencing it individually, but also feeling that the whole community is in that same sense of constant anxiety is something that a lot of us, I think, are finding hard to come to terms with. I've had various times over the last few years where that feeling of not wanting to get out of bed or just sitting in front of the computer and trying to get the words out and nothing comes for a whole day. You get to the end of the day and you've achieved nothing. I've experienced that before. So going into this fire, then pandemic period and experiencing that again wasn't new for me. And I felt very bad for people for whom that is a new experience. What I will say is it's been really, really good for me to have editors that are going through the same experience and so therefore understand. Because obviously one of the big things about not being able to put the words on the page is you've got deadlines. And I've got a weekly column that I have to fill. And there are very, very strict production deadlines because everybody's been under the pump, you know, staff numbers have gone down in newspapers, et cetera, et cetera. And yet every editor that I've worked with has been so understanding and so able to be flexible because we are all in this together. So it's not like I'm the only one going through the problem. Everybody's going through the problem and everybody understands. So I've actually found that very supportive and very reassuring as a writer.
That's great. Just to interject briefly, and I do want to hear a little bit more from you about what you've been up to, because as debilitating as you say it's been, it sounds like you've launched a book in the midst of this, which is a Herculean feat, I'm sure. But I have to say that as a blogger, I'm not often jealous of people having editors and deadlines, but the way you just described it sounds really good.
It has been. I've been incredibly lucky,
I wish I had a few more people sort of knocking on my door and sending me emails saying, hey, where's this piece? Where's that piece? But tell us about the book. It's really exciting and it's been really well received, it sounds like. So how do you launch a book in the middle of a pandemic?
So it's called Intoxicating, 10 Drinks That Shaped Australia. Is that coming up the right way on your screens?
Yes.
Right. So it's a history of drinking in Australia, really, told through the story of 10 specific drinks. I know, right? So it's lots of material there. The fact that I managed to get it into 278 wine-stained pages.
Oh, no, that's just the beer chapter, though, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, but it's open for a sequel. You know, there's 10 more drinks that shaped Australia. But I wanted to make it easily digestible and accessible, so I just focused on these 10 drinks. Obviously, people who know how books are produced, you know, this was all finished by February, and it came out in July. And if that's a paperback, if it was illustrated, it would have taken another 6 months of production and printing. And so I've been very lucky to have that come out in this period. It's given me something to do. It's given me something because I lost a lot of regular work. And it's something positive. It's fantastic to engage with people online. I can't do any book signings or anything like that. Having said that, the last chapter, which involved a couple who live on the New South Wales south coast, so a few hours drive south of Sydney, I was transcribing the interview with them at the same time that the fire destroyed their home. So that was a particularly distressing experience, obviously, for them. But it kind of really brought that reality of the fire home to me in a way, because there was no fires anywhere near Melbourne. That really kind of ironically, now I realise, kind of defined the whole nature of 2020 for me around New Year. So it's been a really interesting experience to write and then release this book in this time. But I think you've had enough of me. We go on to something else.
Well, no, first of all, congratulations. Kudos for getting that out there. It's a great accomplishment, and it sounds like a fascinating way of looking at alcohol, just in terms of a narrative. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. But before we move off you, I would really love to get the down under perspective on the whole Black Lives Matter and social justice movement, because obviously you have an Aboriginal population there that I'm sure had an interesting Black Lives Movement dynamic of its own, but also your perspective on what's going on in the States. Would you mind sharing?
Yeah. So the Aboriginal population in Australia has been subjected to appalling land stealing, wholesale slaughter and massacre, and the Black Lives Matter movement in Australia really over the last 6 months and prior to that is focused on deaths in custody. That's the touch point of the conversation here. The appalling fact, I mean, this is a very similar situation to the States, that black people are dying in custody are in custody in completely unrepresentative numbers compared to the level of Aboriginal people in the population, and over again people die in custody and nobody is brought to justice for it. So that was a very live issue in Australia. So when the Black Lives Matter situation and protests took off in the States, it really gave wind to the sails of the local movement, and we had protests here on an unprecedented scale. So it's a very live issue, and there was a very, very controversial protest here in Melbourne, particularly, where about 10 or 20,000 people turned up at a time when people were not allowed to gather together. And there was a lot of negative pushback from the right wing about that, right wing commentators, and yet there has been not one case of community transmission of the virus that can be traced back to that protest, because it was so well handled by the organisers. And so they were able to take the kind of moral high ground, if you like, on that. For me personally, I've written about a lot of Aboriginal cultural history in my book, because it's really important to the history of drinking in Australia, and it's something a lot of people don't know about. The general conversation about alcohol and Aboriginal people in Australia is overwhelmingly negative, and yet if you look back at history, there are many examples of, for example, Indigenous people in Australia have been drinking fermented drinks for thousands of years, and it's not something that anybody was taught in school. So it was reasons for writing the book was to kind of overturn that perception of our history.
Awesome. RH and Thaddeus, has the social justice awakening, if we can call it that, and certainly the current events, changed how you're writing, how you're approaching your craft? Are you writing different things or writing differently because of what's going on?
Thaddeus, you go ahead.
Well, from my perspective, I have not been doing as much writing as I have done in the past. So, I think once I get back to it, it's going to have a little bit of a different spin to it, in a sense that, just from the things that's been flowing through my mind and just thinking about, I don't have as much to think about as maybe some of you guys do. When you write certain things, you got to make sure it's, not that only that it's grammatically correct, but the perception when someone else reads it, they want to read. It's just a lot of not so much tension, but it's just people scrutinize some of the things that's been that you're going to write a little bit more than you used to in the past. But I might not have that issue with myself, but I've kind of took my writing to in doing like IGTV, doing my podcast and putting things on there to maybe express myself a little bit more, because I think in America, just from the feedback that I get, and we was talking about this in the wine conference a couple of years ago, people aren't reading as much as they do now. They want their information in other ways. And so I try to give it to them in that way as much as I possibly can.
Mm-hmm. All right. What about you?
I find myself wondering if wine writing is important right now. And so I struggle a little bit with whether or not it's even a little bit frivolous of an exercise. And then on another level, I find myself wondering if I've been inclusive enough in the past to write about winemakers and winery owners of color. And so that's given me pause. What have I done to add to systemic racism as it plays out in the wine industry by not profiling people of color? So that's been a wake-up call for me. I think those two things have been revolutions.
There's something. Go ahead, Thaddeus.
If I can just add a little bit more to my perspective on it, I think that through my social media, whether it be Instagram or Facebook, I post a lot of pictures all the time of almost everything that I drink. And I think that from the feedback I get from my people that follow me, they enjoy seeing these types of things. And I think it helps brings them a little bit of joy to their life where you just can't run around miserable and upset all the time. And I recommend this nice bottle of Riesling. It's hot, in the summertime, it's nice and refreshing, and just bring a little happiness into some people's lives. I think that's some of the other ways that I try to contribute myself.
Thank you for that. And I think that gets really at a nub of something that I've been struggling a little bit with, and I've seen our community struggle with, which is the degree to which we have a responsibility to shift our focus and to include what's going on in the world in what we do. A classic example of this is like people hassling Jancis Robinson on Twitter for during in the midst of all this social unrest for talking about a great wine that she had at night, and I've caught some flack for that as well. Like, to what extent do we have responsibilities to sort of drop this, as you say, maybe frivolous thing that we're doing, which is talking about great wines that people should drink in a time when shit is burning down and people are dying at the hands of police and at the hands of an out of control pandemic? Like, should we all sort of switch gears and start focusing on, things that are happening in our local community that have nothing to do with wine? What's the balance there?
Personally, my balance is that I think that every person should do what's in their heart, which they think is the right thing to do. And if in your heart you're living your life correctly, because we all bleed. When you get cut, the blood's the same. So racism is something that's stupid, it's ignorant, because it's a learned behavior. And if you're going to get stuck into that mindset with those people, most of them, you're not going to be able to change their mind anyway. So I say I deal with people no matter what color you are. If you're a good person, I'm a good person, we get along. And if you like to share a glass of wine or a bottle of wine or whatever, I think it's perfectly fine. And if you want to help someone out and give them a little bit different perspective or a different experience, I think it's for the best, man. I just refuse to go down the negative path myself.
Mm-hmm. Max, what are your thoughts?
I think we can do what's the expression? You can chew gum and walk at the same time. I think we can. It's not one or the other. We can write about wine one day. We can just. Thaddeus absolutely hit the nail on the head. It can be a very uplifting experience to read about somebody else's joy.
Yes.
If you can write about wine in a way that connects with the reader and makes them think you're having a great time, you can actually get vicarious pleasure from that, and it can be a moment of relief in this relentless anxiety that we're all going through. But at the same time, then the next time you sit down and write a story, you can write about something that is supporting a community and raising issues. I don't see why we can't do both. I've written about everything from, I totally agree with you, RH, that sometimes I feel that what I do is so stupid that here I am writing about another $3,000 bottle of wine that nobody who's reading the story is going to try ever or be able to afford. It's ridiculous what we do. And yet the next week I'll write about the representation in the wine industry in Australia and how few black faces there are, because of a conversation I had with a black wine educator in Tasmania who basically laid down the challenge. Are you going to write about this? She said. You should write about this. This is an important issue. Yes, it is. So I will. And I did. And it opened my eyes to things, and I hopefully opened the reader's eyes to this issue. And then the next week I'll write about, I don't know, a winemaker making really good single vineyard Pinot Noir from a certain site on the hill, which is about country. It's about understanding who we are in Australia. It's about supporting the community of wine growers in that region. I think we can do all of those things. I don't think we have to just do one or the other. And I think it's so fantastic that this pandemic has brought out these conversations. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine a wine panel of people talking about or reading about wine from 12 months ago where any of these issues would have been raised? I think so. I think it's great that in that sense that we're all talking about this now.
I think it's a great point, Max. And I think all of a sudden now there's a lot of stuff to write about that certainly existed before, I think, and a lot of us were blind to, and I will own the white privilege that went along with that in my universe. But there's a whole host of stories to write about now, that didn't exist before. And I mean, some of them are tragically new, like whether there are going to be any wineries on West Side Road in the Russian River Valley, in a week and a half, which is a horrible thing to have the opportunity to write about, but it's a reality of the way the world is going. But and I think it's a little callous to suggest that this is quote unquote a silver lining to what's happening right now, because I think we'd all rather it not be happening, but it absolutely, there's more interesting new angles on the world of wine that didn't exist before.
Mm-hmm.
So, RH, do you have anything to add to what was just said in terms of what we have, what we're focused on, and whether we're writing differently?
Well, I guess I'll add one last thing. I think overall, this quarantine, my wife and I are some of the lucky ones who are able to make rent and pay our bills so far. And so we have some spare time for personal reflection and maybe some personal growth and reading. And so through that, I do feel like I've hopefully grown a little bit as an individual in the last few months, and I find myself wanting to explore new themes in my writing because of that. And so hopefully that's one little silver lining that came out of this terrible time we're all going through collectively, is that we have a little bit of time for reflection.
Yeah. Well, you just touched on something which I think aligns with a question that's been asked thus far, which is about money, right? So how have we been impacted as wine writers financially by this pandemic? And I don't know if you have anything to share there. It sounds like, knock on wood, you guys are in a good place, RH, but have outlets dried up? I mean, you can also speak in the context of your day job too, as a PR and marketing person. Have clients gone away? What's going on?
I've been extremely fortunate. Work is still coming in, and so I really can't complain. Like I said, I won't take up any airtime about the financial aspects of it, because I feel like we're so lucky. Every time I write that rent check, I feel pretty lucky, pretty grateful.
Yeah. Well, Max, when your main gig is Gourmet Traveler magazine, things obviously change when no one's traveling. Tell us a little bit about your income stream.
Yeah, so the first work that I lost was at the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival, which has been going now for almost 30 years. And I have regular gigs there. I was doing a cider making demonstration. I was doing a food and wine, a food and wine quiz with 200 people crowded, crowded into a room, sharing plates and glasses. Obviously, that didn't happen because the festival was cancelled 2 days before it was meant to start, or something ridiculous. So I lost that. And then Gourmet Traveler got in touch and said my column had been put on pause, which is code for cancelled, because obviously, as you say, a magazine that writes about luxury travel and reviews restaurants doesn't have any advertising in a pandemic. Having said that, the life and leisure section of the Financial Review, which is my weekly gig, has been maintained, partly because it goes back to the frivolous point, RH, that you made before, is that there's still people with money. There's still people in, executive positions who are still spending money on good wine, probably following Thaddeus's advice of drinking the good stuff during a pandemic because it brings you joy. So there's still been a demand for that kind of writing. So I've been very lucky. And I've also been very lucky, and this is, I think, a lot of people listening to us now are looking for ideas about how they can pursue a career in or do what we're lucky enough to do, write about what we enjoy. And one of the things that I found, I've actually picked up a bit of work writing an education guide to cider in Australia. You'll see behind me, there's a couple of demijohns there up on the filing cabinet. I make my own cider, have done for 10 years. It's a side hustle, right? I love cider, so I've spent hours and hours and hours reading about it and researching the history and everything just because I'm interested. And then 10 years into this kind of side hustle of mine, somebody comes along and says, "Would you like some money to write about a topic that you're interested in?" So I say this to people who want to write about wine or drinks. Find something that you are passionate about that maybe everybody around you hasn't twigged to yet, hasn't really got onto the bandwagon. Really go deep dive into that topic, because you never know. One day, somebody is going to say to you, "Oh, I want a story on that topic. Who is this? Oh, that person is the specialist in that," and you will get work from being obsessive about something that you thought would never bring you any income. So I think, I'm really thankful that I got passionate about cider 10 years ago, and it's kind of come to fruition at exactly a time when it's been incredibly helpful.
Yeah. And Thaddeus, you're retired, am I correct?
Yes, I'm a retired FBI agent of 20. I worked for 22 years. I've been retired almost 8 years.
Mm-hmm. So has your work in the world of wine been a source of income for you? Does it need to be? Has that been affected for you at all?
It has not. It has not needed to be at all, because the federal government takes care of you pretty well in America when you put in a certain amount of service. So that has not been an issue with me. I have had several other, as you would call it, a side hustle with other, whether it be a winery or writing an article for someone here or there. And I have done that, but it hasn't been something that I had to rely upon to pay the rent at all. But I have, with the Minority Wine Report, my blog, and now my podcast, Wine in Black and White, I think that I'm going to slowly monetize these two ventures into being able to make some money in the wine field. And the other thing, I thought I was, before this pandemic happened, I thought I was up for a pretty cool little gig with a winery out of South Africa, to be their ambassador to the U.S. But this kind of got put on hold once the pandemic hit, and so we'll revisit it, I think, about 6 months from now and see what happens. But when it was one of their sparkling champagne houses in South Africa that I really believe a lot in, called Graham Beck. They make outstanding wines there, and the winemaker, he used to work at Krug back in the day, which is my favorite champagne ever to drink in the world. So, but it did kind of put things on hold for me. But I didn't need it to pay the rent. My life kept going forward, and I just kept drinking what I call good juice.
Yeah. As just catching up on what's going on in the chat there, to quote my friend Joe Roberts, the gig economy is kind of sucked in the midst of this pandemic. So I think a lot of these gigs are getting put on hold. Back in January, I made the decision to flip-flop my life, and I used to be 80% day job, 20% wine writing, and January 10th, I decided, you know what, I'm sick of that, I'm going to flip them. So just before COVID hit, I was like, all right, I'm quitting my job in the middle of April, and I want to do 80% wine writing, 20% day job, and the universe changed very quickly. Yeah. So, so I'm not a good judge for like how things are going. All of a sudden, I'm actually getting paid to write about wine a lot more than I used to, but that's only because I've been trying now to go out and get paid writing gigs, whereas in the past, I didn't. But I think one of the things that I've seen is that as wineries, and in particular wine associations, are making the shift to this new universe, there's a ton of money that used to be spent on live events and in-person events that are generally pretty expensive. Those dollars are now being shifted to more virtual things, which will include and have included paying more, for wine writing, for virtual seminar hostings and things like that. So there certainly are opportunities that are coming from this situation, but when 30% of the world, or at least the country in America, is unemployed and things are going crazy, that brings with it a certain conservatism about spending money, and that I think is certainly going to affect those of us, living in the freelance world. And then, as some people are putting in the chats, obviously, wine writing is not a full-time gig for most of us, and unfortunately, it sounds like a bunch of us have also lost our jobs in the midst of this. So that's difficult. So Gwendolyn, heart goes out to you for getting laid off before COVID. So we all got to do what we got to do. But maybe we've got about 20 minutes left in the session, and I'd like to maybe shift towards the future a little bit. And in doing so, I can address one of the questions that's been asked here, which is, I guess my question is, what do we think the future looks like for wine writing, and how is it different than it has been in the past? Someone, let's see, Becky has asked, no, sorry, not Becky. Greg has asked, what are we going to carry from this crazy time that we're in now into maybe a future post-COVID? So if we think 2 years out or 3 years out, when with the pandemic is hopefully a thing behind us, and all the social discord and things like that we've been going through now are over, what is it going to be different about what we're doing, and what do we think what we're going to be doing is going to look like? RH, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I hope, a lot of times I think wine writers will write about certain trends, or whether it's natural wine, or a few years ago it was In Pursuit of Balance. Now it's natural wine. Who knows what it'll be next? And I don't know how interesting those things are to the consumer. So I'm hoping that all of this hardship that we're going through collectively has shifted priorities a bit, and that we expand our minds a little bit, embrace the consumer a little bit more, and write for the consumer rather than for the industry, if that makes sense. And I would love to see more Generation Z and millennial writers out there. I really hope this happens, because I love their perspectives. I think they're, oftentimes in the wine industry, the only time we write about millennials and Gen Z is how can we extract money from them and sell them wine, which is such a limiting way to speak about entire swaths of people. They're more than pocketbooks, certainly. And I have a lot of hope in these younger generations. I'm 55, and I just love talking to these younger people, because I think they're a bit more enlightened than my generation. And so I'm hoping that they'll carry that enlightenment over into the world of wine. So please, young people, write about wine.
Thaddeus, what do you think about the future? Where are we headed, and what are you going to take from this time, and how is that going to affect what you do in the future?
I think that I'm an optimist. I believe that the future is very bright, for one. And I just think that the world of wine brings people together. Wine makes people happy. Wine creates conversation, and wine kind of brings friends together and different things. So from that standpoint, I don't think we're going to lose a lot. But the only thing that I think is going to happen, I think it's going to be for the next 3 or 4 years, or maybe more with COVID, is that I think it's changed the United States forever as far as how we gather, how we get together, what people you want to hang out with, what other people. Do you want to go inside and have dinner in a restaurant that's filled with people, or are you going to have dinner outside? Whatever. I think it's going to change that whole perspective. And here in Chicago, for instance, there's tons of restaurants that's not even opening back up, because their model wasn't built on 50% capacity. So they're just shutting down now, and I think that it's gonna have people rethink a lot of things and try to bring it back in perspective. But I think that maybe after I get done with this panel with you guys just gave me a great thing to think about writing about, how I drank my way through the pandemic. I'm serious. I think that's going to be the title.
All right, it's going to be a really long list from what I've heard.
I know it, because just real quick, I was just down in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, where I live at. I have a home at just 2 weeks ago. I was there Tuesday through Sunday, and I just counted up my pitches. I drank over 65 wines during those 4 or 5 days. So I had a really good time down there, and it made me happy, and it made other people happy. So everything's good, though. But yes.
Max, what does the future look like down under? How is wine writing going to change for you?
It already was. It already was changing. A lot of I think what we're going to see in the near to medium term future was already in train. Newspaper columns, there aren't that many left. I'm very lucky to have one. I feel like I'm in a bit of a kind of bubble in that respect. One of the great things is discovering this new diversity of voices, because the access to the conversation is there now for so many more people. I've met, you guys through this session, last year's media conference in the Hunter Valley, meeting all these different voices, hearing from all these different voices. There's people coming up through the wine community here in Australia, and reaching new audiences. So that was already in train, and I think it's fantastic that is happening. It's really important. I agree with RH that we need to get rid of the older generation. I've been trying to kind of get out of it, or rather expand what I do. And one of the things, like you, Alder, at the beginning of the year, I was accepted in a fellowship at Melbourne Uni, and I was looking forward to a year of teaching and things like that. But obviously, the pandemic put paid to that, as a way of kind of sidestepping and saying somebody else needs to come in and start talking about wine too. It's not just the old white guys or middle-aged white guys that have been talking about wine in Australia for so long. So I think the conversation is going to change. I think that's a really good thing. I think if I can give you maybe a little glimmer of hope in California right now for how bad the situation is with the fires, that we went through a similar situation here in Melbourne and the Yarrow Valley particularly, just outside Melbourne in 2009, where 160 odd people died in just a couple of days of particularly horrific fires, and vineyards were lost, wineries were destroyed, etc. A lot of people are still traumatized by that now. It doesn't go away. It takes a long time for that kind of impact to subside. But the way that event and subsequent years brought the community together was really fantastic and strong. We already saw it this year with the fires in the northeast of my home state of Victoria, that as soon, and the Adelaide Hills is another example of a region that was really badly affected. As soon as people could get back to those regions, people, wine drinkers, flooded back to support those communities with their dollars, by buying wine, by showing up. And I think what has changed now with this particular event is that we all realize once again that we are all part of a community, whether we're writing about it, drinking the good juice, making it, growing it, and that we are all in this together, and that we all rely on each other to keep going. So hopefully it's not just a commercial transaction. It's much more than that. And it's a way of supporting communities. It's a way of supporting people. So I like to think that is something that will grow and build in future years. And as communicators, in whatever role, we have a responsibility to help that process along.
Absolutely. And there's going to be a lot of help that's needed, right? When these fires end, which they will, even though we're in the middle of it right now in the Bay Area, and it doesn't feel like it's going to, Bay Area and California in general, they will end, and then we're all going to have to rebuild, and we have a role to play in that as communicators. I also want to add something that I see being touched on in the chat here too, which is sort of like what kind of opportunity this crazy pandemic, self-isolation, downtime, unfortunately for some people being laid off and not having a job, what kind of opportunity that represents for us in our careers as wine writers. And I can't remember who's saying it, maybe Reggie there in the chat, but there's sort of an old saying about how the companies that do best after a recession are those that invested in R&D during the recession, right? Because we will come out of this bad time, and those that are going to be best positioned to to take advantage of what comes next are those that did work in the middle of this. And so while it's, I'm sure, cold comfort to those of us who've lost jobs or are dealing with sick family members or things like that, the extra time that's come from whether it's working from home or having more time is definitely an opportunity to, practice new skills to go deep in that cider world and build up a body of knowledge that you can then use afterwards to practice new kinds of writing or even just do more writing so that you have pieces to go out and sell after this. So there's definitely something to using this time and using the opportunity that it represents as a way of investing in yourself and investing in your career, for sure. So I definitely want to put a gold star on those of you who are saying things like that.
But don't beat yourself up if you're not doing that. I think
Yes.
I read somewhere that now is not the time. Now is not the time to be setting unachievable goals. Because I agree with you. I catch myself sitting here thinking I should be doing more. If I'm not able to get that article written today or whatever because it's just I'm having a bad day, I should be doing something else. I should be learning a new skill, or I should be working on my website or something. I think that creates more anxiety. Actually, you need to be able to give yourself also the space to do nothing. To actually say, well, if it's not coming today, it's not coming today. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You don't have to achieve that. So I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right, but also don't beat yourself up if it's not coming.
Self-compassion, very important, right, RH?
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting because I find myself so drawn to the consumer. I always have loved the idea of writing for the consumer more so than the trade. But I'm enjoying observing how consumers are drinking during this time and how their habits have changed a little bit more in the DTC or direct to consumer channel versus in the wholesale, and people exploring more opportunities to try new wines. So that's something that maybe we can. Hopefully, there's an opportunity there to write more for the consumer just by sort of observing these habits right now that are going on.
Mm-hmm. Thaddeus, everybody wants to know what you're drinking.
Oh, I wish I had the bottle. It's in the refrigerator, but it's Riesling. It's a German Riesling 2012 from the Mosel. And, it's just when it's hot outside and like here it's 85, 89 here. This is the most refreshing drink you can probably drink when it's hot outside. It's just, and I drink mostly dry Rieslings. That's where America gets fooled at, because in Germany, they hardly ever drink sweet Rieslings. They drink dry. And they let the Americans drink most of the sweet. But I take it upon myself to try to find the dry Rieslings here in America. And I like them all. And also, I just recently wrote about or did an IGTV about Finger Lakes up in New York. Fantastic Rieslings coming out of Finger Lake. And I know you guys, I missed that conference. You guys was there maybe last year or so, but I missed it. Fantastic Rieslings out of Finger Lake. So you guys should check that out also.
Yeah. Somebody's asked the question, somewhat hopeful, somewhat pleading, somewhat begging. Do we think that wine festivals will ever come back?
Yes.
What do you guys think?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, just me. I think that if you're outdoors and if you can keep some reasonable distance between yourself, I will feel comfortable going to a wine festival. That's just how. Now, indoors probably not, but outdoors I can see that coming back.
Mm-hmm. RH, Max, what do you guys think?
I'll just say I'm dubious about anything very big on the festival side happening for a few years. I'm seeing, I think, more virtual tastings as well, and people thinking of creative new ways to share their wines. But I surely wouldn't go to a festival anytime soon, and I love wine. So
it doesn't look very likely, does it? Certainly in the next 12 months. But people will come up with a new way of doing it. I think, Thaddeus, you're right. We are coming out of winter now. We're heading into spring. We're heading into summer. And there will be lots of opportunities for outside tastings where people are distanced. Certainly the cellar doors that around in Victoria that were able to open up in the period where we had a brief period of freedom, found that even within quite strict situations where people were distanced and everybody had to have something to eat, there wasn't any of that standing at a tasting counter shoulder to shoulder spitting into a bucket type of tasting. One winery I was speaking to said they had a fraction of the normal numbers on that weekend that they first opened, but they made more money because people were sitting down engaging at a much deeper level with the people working in the cellar door, and they ended up selling fewer bottles, but of the higher priced, more interesting wines.
Well,
so
that's
as a change to habits is a really interesting glimpse, perhaps, of the future.
Yeah, and what you've just described is in fact a shift that's happened, in particular in Napa, over the last 5 to 7 years, as they've gone from the tasting bar where everyone bellies up and has their taste for $20 to a much more immersive, sort of sitting down at a table with food. For that reason, is that it's more effective for wineries, and I think that kind of format obviously is easier to do in a physically distanced way, and so it'll be interesting to see what kind of innovation happens as that goes on.
Well, I'm planning on going to Napa September 9th through the 14th, so it's going to be interesting. Hopefully, God willing, the fires have died down and you guys are in better shape, but I'm interested to see how they're going to handle the social distancing in Napa, because most of these wineries have large areas and they have a lot of land, and I can see how you can spread things out and make it very comfortable for your customers, because Napa's going to be hurting as far as money wise if they don't get these visitors back out there. They live and die, especially the hotels, the restaurant business in Napa Valley. That's what those guys do. They drink wine, they go to a restaurant, they go to bed at 9 o'clock and start it over again. But they're gonna need some help. So it'll be interesting. Yes.
Yeah. We've got about a few minutes left here, folks. Are there any outstanding questions? I think we've worked through all the ones that have been submitted. Feel free to throw them in the chat.
I'd like to ask Max a question, if you don't mind.
Go, please.
Hey, Max. I haven't been to Australia. It was on my list until this pandemic happened, but I'm sure it's going to be back on my list at some point in life. But in Hunter's Valley, is Semillon as good as they say it is?
Well, of course, I have to say yes, but it is an acquired taste, right? So when Hunter Valley Semillon, when it's young, it's only about 10% alcohol, and it's very light and crisp, and when it's like now 2020 vintage, the few that were produced because of the fires and the smoke, on the market now, oysters, seafood, refreshing, a day like you're experiencing, 85, 90 degrees, cold, straight out of the ice bucket, delicious, just so easy to drink, crisp, but don't think about it very hard. You put that same wine in the cellar for 10, 20, 30 years, and it develops, it fills out with this rich, buttery, toasty, smoky, flinty. It's one of the wine world's most remarkable transformations. But they're not all great, right? You need to have one of those transformative experiences with a great one, and you go, oh, I get it now. But you might have to wade through a few before you get to that experience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Definitely keep going, because you will find that transformative, glowing golden wine. So yes is the answer.
Yeah, no. The first time you have a great 20-year-old, 30-year-old Hunter Valley Semillon, it's you're like, wow.
Okay.
For sure. Okay, looks like we got another question that's popped in. Rebecca Hopkins asks, who is your favorite wine writer of all time? RH.
Eric Asimov, hands down, no question. Second place, Esther Mobley.
Okay. Thaddeus, favorite wine
writer. I guess some of the biggest, the most thorough wine books that I've read, the one called the Wine Bible, and I think there's this other lady, which is Becky Weiserman, I believe.
Becky Wasserman.
Wasserman,
the
yes,
importer?
yes, the importer, yes. Let's go to Max and come back to me. I'm gonna get you the name on that. Yes.
Okay.
Well, Alder, you and I obviously have to say Jancis Robinson, right?
Oh,
No.
yeah, that's who I was trying to get to, is Janice Robinson. Thank you, Matt.
And Jancis, obviously, but the person I think doesn't get enough credit because he doesn't have enough of an international audience is, and I think this is why Beck asked this question, is Philip White, who's a writer in Adelaide who has been battling through and surviving cancer over the last 18 months, and just through sheer unbelievable stubborn force of will. Philip can put words together about wine and life like nobody else you can think of. So he would be the person I would suggest people go on to his blog, Drinkster, I think, and have a look at some of his writing, because when he's on fire, he's you look at his words and you think, how did you come up with that? I don't understand how you did that with your brain.
Yeah, I don't like everything that he writes, but when he nails it, he really nails it. My answer to that would be, if I'm allowed to say two, I would say Terry Thies, who I think
Terry Thies a lot.
is just a really amazing writer, and Andrew Jefford. I pretty much love everything that Andrew writes. He's just got such a lyrical approach. All right, Thaddeus, you got any more to add to the list?
No. I was gonna. The lady I was coming up with was Janice Robertson. That's who I was gonna go with. Yes.
Got it. Any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A? Would anybody like to add anything? And my panelists as well, if you have questions for each other, fire away. Okay. Gwendolyn asks, Andrew who? Andrew Jefford, Jefford. He writes for Decanter Magazine as well as occasionally for the Financial Times. Yeah. Brianne, that's very nice of you to say that this was the bestest way to end the WMC 20. It's very kind of you. I definitely agree with some of you who found this slightly cathartic, and a little bit of group therapy. I think we all need more of that. And Alan, do you want to take us out here?
Well, yeah, I want to just say thank you to the four of you for coming on here and giving us that awesome discussion. I appreciate it. So we appreciate not only you four, and thank you. And I think Sarah might take you off. So say your goodbyes now.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
See you guys.
Sarah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you to all of our speakers. And I also want to mention that Sarah did a fantastic job with this whole event. She was pretty much in charge. Once I sort of put it together, she ran the show. So it was fantastic. I do want to quickly say too that, it's fantastic to see everybody participating. We're so happy that we were able to do this. At the same time, I got to say, I'm a little bit sad. We're supposed to be in Oregon right now and we're not. So I know that's true for everybody. We also are experiencing hard times. We run conferences and tours, not good industries to be in right now, right? But we're managing, we're surviving with the help of PPP loans and furloughing and half-time employment and a lot of other things like that. So we do plan to be around next year, and we are good at this organizing thing. We've actually run 2 tours during this pandemic. Normally it would be 20, but nevertheless, we have run 2 tours. We do have experience. And to give you a little hope, we actually have a beer media conference, which is scheduled for this fall. And if the state of Texas gets its act together and controls the virus, we believe we can run that conference because it will be outside. And so we are very much hoping that we can run the Wine Media Conference in 2021. There will be changes to that no matter what happens, whether it's the size, how many people are actually allowed to attend, whether we have to split into smaller groups at times, whether we're doing most of the items or all the items outdoors. We will make adjustments But we do hope that you all, the wine media, will support us by coming and attending, and hopefully you'll have 2 years, and some of you 3 years if you didn't make it to Australia, of desire built up. And we also are counting on the wine industry to support us with sponsorship, as they have done so well in the past. And I want to say this. Yeah, Luciana made a comment on the previous session that I always look too busy at the conference to approach. The pandemic, the recession, the Black Lives Matter protests, hopefully everybody's rethinking what they are doing in life and who they are and what's important. And I am doing the exact same thing. And I got to say, when it comes down to it, we all know this, but we forget this. It's the people that are important. So I just want to say that all of you out there listening to this now or listening to this later, it's you who are important to us. And next year in Oregon, I am going to make sure that I have conversations with as many of you as possible. Thank you all for participating in this first, and we hope not annual virtual wine media conference. See you in Oregon next year.